Wammo Breakfast.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Yes, joining us from Melbourne City this morning, Janine Young. Good morning to you, Janine.
Good morning, Wammo.
Great story. First up, well, great for us to talk about it, but not necessarily great for the environment. Of course, everyone's talking about the oil spill over the past few months in the Gulf of Mexico and how bad that is. And in fact, it's kind of weird because I think we actually talked about this, about where the oil's actually gone, because they're saying, oh, it's all disappeared, but really it's existing there somewhere. It's doing something. But potentially, Janine, you're going to tell us about a worse problem when it comes to oil in the oceans that we're not talking about.
Certainly a longer-term one. This is an issue that has come out of a whole bunch of ships that have been sunk over the last 70, 80 years. World War II was responsible for an awful lot of ships being sunk. So they're sitting at the bottom of the ocean at the moment. And over time, they're now starting to leak oil. Now, there are an awful lot of craft that was sunk. A lot of them were merchant ships, so they were carrying oil. They were effectively tankers because they were part of the supply routes that were trying to get to various parts of the world. Now, if you look in areas like the Pacific, for example, there's a lot of ships down there. 85% of them are Japanese, and you've got a whole bunch in the US, you've got them in the Mediterranean, they're in the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean. They're right across the world, and there's a lot of them. A global estimate in 2005 was that there was more than 8,500 wrecks, and 1,500 of these, close to 1,600, were oil tankers. Some of them were carrying up to 4,000 tonnes of oil.
Goodness.
That's a lot of oil. Now, they've worked out that these are decaying. Some of them were damaged as they went down. And they've worked out there's kind of a global standard of losing about 1 millimetre of the steel, the actual structure of the ship, every decade. And if you think about World War II, that's about 70 years. And some of them were around, 19 to 2.5 mil thick, or 25 mil thick, I should say. So you think that there's probably not a great deal of structural integrity left, and that's part of the problem. There's a whole bunch of research going on now, although not as much as there should be, because it's really only the US that's taking this up, that's trying to work out how long the ships have been there, how big a problem it's likely to be, what we can do about the problem, because, as I said, there's a lot of them, and more importantly, who will pay?
Yeah, because exactly. I mean, the world's moved on, governments have moved on. This was a problem back then. They didn't think this was going to come and ever revisit us.
Well, you don't think it will. A ship's gone, it's out of sight, out of mind, except there's a whole bunch of islands in the Pacific that just every now and then get slicks across their beaches for no apparent reason after a really bad storm.
Right.
They're finding that there's a number of ships in particular that just casually leak, and it's one of those things that they sort of always blamed on a whole bunch of passing ships and tankers and the like in various specific locations. But tests showed that the oil wasn't consistent with the ones that are coming past along those shipping channels. And so they've had to go down into the wrecks. And if you do choose to remove the oil off them, it's incredibly expensive. It depends on where it's located, how deep it is. They estimate that it costs, and this was a 2005 estimate, that it's between $2,300 and $17,000 a tonne to remove the oil from a wreck, and that's just for one of them. Countries that used to own these ships, 85% of the ones in the Pacific are Japanese, as I said, they're not going to want to pay for all of this because it's actually not in their waters. And as you said, out of sight, out of mind, no one ever thought this would be an issue. But estimating anywhere between 2.5 million and 20 million tonnes of oil are going to leak across the planet, across these oceans. Who knows when? They think there'll probably be a peak sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. Someone's got to do something. This is more than twice what was released in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
It's a frightening kind of problem because it has serious implications for, coastal environments, and as they say, it's a massive economic problem.
But what do you think? Potentially a source of oil when supplies start to dwindle, we could get some of this back.
It could be, but it's unfortunately the cost. It cost $19 million just to remove the oil from one particular tanker that was causing issues. I don't know exactly where it was. It's probably in the Pacific, I think, or might have been in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a lot for one ship, and it depends on how many tons you get off each one. So I imagine there's going to be a balance in between how much it costs, where it's located, and how much oil there is to get off in the first place.
All right, on to our next story. Janine, have you been talking to yourself this morning?
I talk to myself all the time. The voice in my head doesn't stop talking, which explains why I probably didn't get a lot of sleep last night, because my other half and I are trying to buy a house, and I'm running through all the different issues and thinking about one house over another, and, we've got the auction this week. I talk to myself all the time.
Yeah,
trust me, you don't want to hear what goes on, because there's an awful lot of chatter. But it turns out I'm not the only one. At least I don't think I am. Researchers know that the voices inside our heads aren't just, trying to keep ourselves sane or otherwise. It potentially has a lot to do with how our language developed and how intelligent we are. You might think that, wandering down the street and telling yourself you're stupid because you forgot your keys is one thing. But over time, they've worked out that the ability to name and to actually have categories for things and the like was really important for the development of language. If you have, for example, the ability to know what something is called, it actually primes recognition. Case in point, if you are simulating a hunter-gatherer experience, as some researchers have done, if you know the name for a berry, you're going to be able to find it in the bushes a lot more quickly than if you don't. Another experiment gave some volunteers some aliens to look at. Now, they were told that some were evil and that some were good. Of course, you can't have anything other than evil aliens, can you? And so some had ridges on their heads, some had bumps in various places. They weren't told which ones were good and bad, but they guessed which one was just by looking at it, and then sort of said, actually, no, you're right or you're wrong. Very quickly they learned to distinguish the features. But interestingly, when some of them had a name, so, I don't know, pick a name, Liebisch or Ibum or whatever, they were given a name, they were able to work out much more quickly which ones were good and which ones were evil, just by giving it a name.
So how does that relate to the inner voice then?
The inner voice is the names that we give for things. We're actually constantly talking to ourselves. I know when I'm in the supermarket, for example, I'm looking for something, I'm kind of going, right, soap. I need soap. That's the soap I need.
Yeah.
When you actually have a particular brand, I told you I talk to myself all the time.
Yeah.
But when you're looking for specific brands in a supermarket, and again, this is another experiment they did, if you are looking for, say, Sprite in a supermarket, then actually knowing what you're looking for and saying, right, Sprite. Got it, happens a lot more quickly than if you don't.
Right. So
it actually has practical applications every day. So the constant chatter we have inside our heads is an indication of the fact that we have names for things, we have categories for things, and therefore we're able to sort out our world a lot more quickly and a lot more easily than if we didn't.
So I shouldn't be giving a wide berth to the person in the supermarket who's walking down the aisle going, cornflakes, I want cornflakes, I've got to have cornflakes. So
I think the person who vocalises, and they might be a little bit different than someone who perhaps doesn't.
Sure.
I think you tend to know the person that you want to avoid who's going, cornflakes.
Janine Young, I shall pay more attention and respect the voice in my head after our conversation today. Thanks very much.
See you next week.
Janine Young is, of course, from New Scientist Magazine. New Scientist Magazine is out next week, and those stories you'll find in there. Also, check out the website as well, newscientist.com.